Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Thanks again for being here. My name is Katie Egan, and I am from CourseArc, and I have with me Jennifer Miller. Just a couple of housekeeping things before we get started. So first of all, we are recording the session, so we will share that with everyone after the recording is done, and feel free to share this with your colleagues. And then secondly, Jennifer will be my wingman today, so she will be making sure that she answers any questions that are in the chat or the Q&A session. So feel free to use that. And if she sees that there's a question that I need to address, she'll make sure that she stops me and we take care of that. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Just to give you guys a really quick agenda, how this is going to go today. So the purpose of today is to talk about transitioning to CourseArc. So I'm going to do a very brief introduction, and then we have 3 examples. So we're going to show you the before and after of 3 pieces of content. There may be a couple people here that actually have helped me with some of this. So if I see them on the attendee list, I'll invite them to comment as well. And then we'll stop and take 10 minutes for questions. So we're hoping to wrap this up in 30 minutes. We know your time is valuable. So again, I started recording. This is recording. And Jennifer, unless I'm just going to pause for a minute to see if there's any questions before I move on.
Nope, not so far.
Okay. Great. Okay. So before I share the 3 sample pieces of content, I wanted to share our core values. So I wanted to just start by saying that we really believe that anyone can build quality online content, especially, and we know that it's very difficult, especially now given the circumstances, how everyone's really trying to move very quickly to online, but we still think it's possible to have really high quality content. Second thing is we believe the best people to build your content are your own, people within your organization. So we strongly support insourcing the development of content as opposed to outsourcing it. And then finally, we believe that content should be accessible. So regardless of your disability, your access, your bandwidth, any of those things, we think the content should be accessible to all learners. So we really, when we are thinking about how we best serve our clients and students that are using our product, we always are thinking with these 3 things in the back of our mind. All right, so again, what I wanted to mention was again, there might be a couple people on today that actually helped contribute to some of this. So I'll stop at each point to see if they're in the attendee list, if they want to comment. But what I wanted to, again, just reiterate for those of you that I see a couple of people have just recently joined. What I'm going to share are 3 pieces of content that are in the process of being moved online. They're very different content areas, as you will see, and I'm going to show you the before and after. Okay, so the first one that I am going to start with is content on the Reformation. So the first one I wanted to share is a PowerPoint slide deck. So this is Reformation content, higher ed class. And again, traditionally they teach lecture style in the classroom and everything has been moved online. So I received the slide deck as sample content, and they also took the slide deck and did a voiceover. So I'm going to start with this one. This one again is on the Reformation. And I'm going to go into preview mode. Just cover my screen so you guys can see it pretty well. Okay. So in this case, again, the professor was used to doing lecture style. So what I tried to do was really pull apart some of the elements of the PowerPoint and get them to present online. Again, thinking that they're not going to be able to see their students potentially in the fall, and so trying to make it as interactive as possible. So in this case, this is a very short introduction to the Reformation. In the slide deck, there were some key terms that he mentions up front in the slide, in the PowerPoint presentation. So what I did is I created a very easy vocabulary activity. So the students can read the definitions or the descriptions, choose the answer, and then they can check their latest move. So again, the rationale here is if you can pull some of the content out of the slide deck and the students can interact and read that on their own, it's going to reduce the load on the instructor in terms of what they need to produce themselves. All right, so in this topic, he's talking about the different doctrines in terms of Holy Communion. So I just put, a little introduction, and I pulled most of this from what he said in the PowerPoint presentation. And then I went into competing theories. So again, I wanted to give the faculty member that I was working with a couple of different ways that he might attack this. So I have two different options here. So the first one you see here is in the slide deck. I'm just going to go back and refresh your memory really quick. In the slide deck, he's going through transubstantiation, consubstantiation, memorialism, and virtualism. I'm not sure if I pronounced all of those correctly, but he's talking about the different philosophies and doctrines in terms of how they perceived Holy Communion and then how that leads to the Reformation. So the first thing, again, sorry, I lost my window. Here we go. So the first way is I used our tab block, which is a great way to chunk large parts of content. Now, again, this would be, I just put in a little bit of filler content to give you guys the idea. This is really not, he would need to fill in more gaps. I didn't have the background knowledge to do that. But this is just a way that he could potentially present the same content. So he would have the students go through and look at each one of the different doctrines and what they believed. And I added a couple of images here to obviously represent the leaders in that. So that was one way. And then, obviously he's going to want to make sure that their learning is assessed, even if this isn't graded, just to make sure the students are engaged. So in this case, they're just, drag and drop where you can identify which is a Catholic, an element of Catholicism or Protestantism. And again, similar to before, the students can check the move. Again, this is, in terms of the content, this is pretty basic. It would be a little bit more rigorous. Obviously, this is higher ed, but you guys can get the idea. And then in terms of the assessment, he might choose to do a writing prompt. So in this case, they're talking about the consequences of the Protestant versus the Roman Catholic counter-reformation, and they would have a writing prompt. And then the faculty member could obviously see what they've written and grade it, right? So that's kind of option one. That would be the philosophy of they're deconstructing the entire slide deck and they're putting all of the pieces online. All right, so the second option, again, I wanted to there's no one way to do anything in CourseArc, and oftentimes there's definitely no one right way. So another possibility is, in this case, like I told you, he just did voiceover over the PowerPoint, and this is embedded. So they're gonna watch the video just like they might do in the class, in the lecture. I'm gonna go ahead and hit play. You guys probably aren't going to be able to hear it. But he would go through the slide deck, he would talk over it. And then again, it would be important that he makes sure that they've actually watched it and they've understood things. So there's a couple things he could do. So for one example is he could use the graphic organizer tool. Again, this is an interactive block. They have to take notes, and he meaning the faculty member that I worked with, he would be able to see that they actually completed this. And they could print it and keep it in their notebook if they wanted to, but they would just, keep notes, take notes on the video, and then they'd have to identify the different positions in this follow-up activity, and then they could potentially even have a quiz. Again, this is not a very rigorous quiz. I just made some simple questions, but you can get the idea that he could potentially create a multiple choice test, 5 questions, to assess their knowledge and really, confirm that they've actually watched the video. So I'm going to go ahead and pause and just see, Jennifer, if there's any questions. Again, this is example 1. So this is a higher ed course on the Reformation that is typically always taught lecture and is going online.
No questions have come in, but If anyone has anything to ask, please feel free.
Awesome. Okay, so Paul, we've given you audio, so I'll start, and then if you want to jump in at any point and add to this, feel free. So Paul is from Madison College, and he teaches, again, I'm going to probably mess this up, but very technical content. So what I'm scrolling here on the right, hopefully you guys can see it. This is from one of his courses. It's called Introduction to Mechanical Drive Systems. So Paul, like the rest of the country, is faced with trying to take content that, potentially would be dry and very, very difficult to put online. And so, I've just started working with him. Paul, you want to add anything to that?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Perfect. I'm here to learn. So my students do not like online, and I'm going to do the best I can to make it tolerable. And then anyway, so thank you.
Okay, that's great. And Paul, if you want to add anything when I'm done. So what Paul talked about is, obviously there's a lot of hands-on, there's a lot of steps that they have to go through and different processes. So again, I'm gonna minimize this now that I've shown you that. So what we came up with, again, I'm going to go to preview mode so you guys can see it a little bit better. We came up with a couple of different ideas. So there's a lot of drawings, diagrams, directions, parts that they need to know. So one idea that we had was to do an image hotspot. So to take some of the drawings and then make them interactive. So again, I think I have filler content in here. Yeah, you guys can see I just have my Latin filler content in here, but you could identify parts with, so the Reformation, by the way, I could kind of fake. This I cannot fake. So, he could click on and add just some contextual information to each of these things. And then again, what Paul was mentioning to me the other day is he might end up doing short videos, referring to different pieces of that. So this is one way that he could do that and perhaps get the same experience, potentially as online. Another example that I came up with for Paul was, this is very simple. So this was just a checklist. So he said, a lot of times it's really important that they do things obviously in a particular order. They need to make sure they do them right. And just for them to have their, this is really just for the student, for them to have a list of what they need to do. They can do it and just, check it off as they're done. So this was just a sample, again, that I wanted to create for Paul. Again, trying to help as much as we can make it not, like Paul said, we don't want it to be tolerable. We want them to actually think that this experience is okay. Again, there might be some important parts that they need to know. In this example, there were items or different things that they needed to know with the control panel. So the thought is, maybe they're reading about that in the manual, and then they just have a short knowledge check. So they could just, drag the answer over that they think is correct. And then again, they can get the answer themselves. So they don't have to wait. They can just kind of test their knowledge. Another thing, again, this is not one of Paul's videos. He doesn't have a video yet that he shared with me, but what we talked about is he could also do something similar to what you guys showed before, is create a video, and then as long as you have the embed code, you can embed that in here. So, for example, he might demonstrate how you install something, and then they could watch it. And I mean, that is really nice because when the students are completely separated from the instructor, it's nice for them to get that visual connection. So if you do have instructors that have the ability, they have the resources and the savvy to do videos, I think that's a great way to try to stay connected to the students. Another example, again, kind of similar to the Reformation, I wanted to give a couple of different ways that Paul might tackle this. So in this case, I have the accordion block, which helps you chunk content. So here, So this is kind of taking the idea of the checklist and just presenting it in a different way. So in this case, they have, you know, part one here, they have the first step, and then this might be a video of Paul actually showing them how to do that first part. And then once they've completed that, they would go to step two. Again, I just have this video here, just so this might be something that would be really helpful. Again, for those of you that might be teaching more technical content, you know, science, math, anything technical. And then again, I definitely took some liberties here. So hopefully, you know, these are not necessarily rigorous questions, but this again might be something that Paul could do just to create a quiz at the end of each section with, you know, the most important things that you really want to make sure that they've learned. And again, you know, they can just go through, I'm not reading any of this, but they could submit it and they would get immediate feedback. And I have it set for them to try again, but if it was really high stakes, Paul could turn that off. So they would just have one attempt. And all of this can be passed to the grade book. The other thing, just really quick, that I know Paul had asked about, you know, he said, I have these, you know, these lab books and other things. So you can definitely link to PDFs or other reading materials. This lab book right here that I have linked is that Word document that you guys just saw. So a couple different ways that you can handle this. Paul, you want to add anything?
What my hope is that what they're probably going to do in the fall is only allow half the students in at a time.
Mm-hmm.
So my hope is that we will walk through the lab virtually. So when they come in, they're ready to just do it.
That's great. That's a really good, that would be a great model.
I think that's going to work, hopefully.
Yeah, that's a great, yeah. It's like a little bit of like a flipped classroom.
And one more question.
Okay, so then the last example is very, very different. This is, but I thought it was important because what we're seeing now at CourseArc is everyone's going online, even elementary school students. So this was a request from a client who, gosh, I think this is pre-K or K, I'm not sure, but this is a packet. I'll just quickly go through it. That they are doing with a parent or an adult, where they're looking at words, they're writing words, they all are, you know, they're all have to do with the beach, and they do some writing practice. So I didn't do all of this, and then they have some optional activities at the end, but I wanted to show how even with elementary school, you might be able to easily transfer some of the learning to online. So again, I'm going to close this one and this one because we're done. I'm going to go into preview. Okay, so this is, again, this is just a mock-up. I think the first thing that you're going to see is we really spent some time on the theme here to make it look like, you know, it's for little kids. So, you know, we definitely think that the theme is important, and you can have a different look and feel depending on the age of your student. So with Paul's course and the Reformation example, you know, that was really built for adult learners. We wanted to look modern and slick and clean. But this, you know, we just want it to look a little bit more fun. It's for little kids. We want it to be inviting. So the icons are cuter and bubblier. Okay, so in this case, again, they have the picture. They're doing with this with an adult. So again, I put in the graphing block here for them to type in. But they could also do this on paper, right? So they could type it in with a parent, okay? Vocabulary. So in this, it's gonna be really important for them to see the picture. You know, they're seeing the picture, they're saying the word, and then they are going to write the word on their own paper. So again, you can see they go through these flashcards, they'd look at the bucket, they'd say the word bucket with their parent, and then they would write it on paper. Okay. Practice, again, similar. They are going to have to match the picture by dragging it next to the correct word, and they can check their latest move. Again, if they have really tiny hands, they might need an adult to help them with the mouse movement. But the great thing about this is accessible, so they can also use their keyboard. And then a couple more examples. This again, you saw, so you saw the hotspot activity in a very different use case with Paul's course, you know, the mechanical drawing, but here, in this case, they are going to click on this. And again, you guys aren't going to be able to hear the audio, but the teacher could add the word sandcastle, them saying the word sandcastle. So this is really nice. They get the visual of the sandcastle, they can see the word here, and then they can actually click and hear it said, and then they would write it on a piece of paper. So a lot of different ways.
Ada has a question. She wants to know if this was a lot of work to create. Was it difficult?
I did this I did it last night in like 20 minutes. Now again, like obviously, I know CourseArc really well, but no. And I would say it was not hard at all. And the theme,
and Ada,
I think the theme design took maybe 20 minutes.
So Ada shared that she is a learning tech coordinator in Berkeley. So I think someone in your position would probably, you know, have prior knowledge that would really, you know, help you pick things up really quickly. But CourseArc is built for, you know, anywhere from instructional designers down to teachers, you know, no code required. So it's super easy and accessible.
Yeah, let me show you this last page, and then I'll go under the hood, so to speak, Ada. I'll show you, I could show you exactly how I did this page. So
and
then
one more question real quick before you leave this page. Paul wants to know if that's called a slide deck.
No, Paul, this is called image with hotspots. A slideshow is more, it's just like a more traditional slideshow. So they would cycle through that.
Thank you.
And then just, I don't know if you guys remember, but in the beach day activity, they had, you know, optional activities for the kids to look at. So here, you know, I put these in an accordion, or no, this is either tabs or accordion. So they could take a trip to the beach, or they could look at Milo, really some cute stuff. But again, just really, really easy, you know, versus if you think about it, you know, this is actually one element that's much better for it to be online, you know, versus here, you'd have to click on these, or, you know, if it's a printed copy, you'd have to type it in. So, all right, so let me show you guys, since we have a couple more minutes, I will just address Ada's question. So I'm just going to go ahead and I will go under the hood with this vocabulary. Actually, I'm going to do this one, the practice. So I'm just going to hit edit. So Ada, you can see now I'm in edit mode, and I have the visual cue that I'm in edit mode because these red dots are around the blocks, and you create content in CourseArc by choosing blocks. So like when Paul asked, is that the slideshow or, you know, image hotspots, those, we have a bunch of different block types. So it's very, very easy to build content. I'm going to go ahead and just hit edit so you can see what it looks like. So in this case, I had the images, and then I added the labels. So if I wanted to add a new one, I would just, you know, go and find, I'm just going to choose this one because it's here. I would find my image, and then I could label it, you know. And then you can see, obviously you have to add the alt text. But it's really, really easy, really easy to use. Let me go ahead. I'm not going to save that edit. I want to show you guys, I'm going to pull up just the one that I had up for Paul's course. Give me 1 second. So in Paul's course, I think I had a matching in here. I can show you that one. Give me 1 second. Should have left these up. Here we go. Yeah, the matching. So again, I'm going to click edit this page, and you'll see I can't edit the theme. That's done by the design team. So if you are from, you know, kind of the instructional technology department, we would work with your team on the design. And then I go in, you know, if I'm Paul and I want to create a matching activity, I would choose that block. And then all I'm doing is really focusing on the content, which is filling out a very simple form. And then when it's saved, it's going to take on the theme that's already been designed. And then the great thing is all of our stuff is accessible. So you can see this accessible activity is auto-generated. So it's very, very easy to use, and it's really easy to share content. So if you have teams of people that are working together, or if you have, you know, just even in Paul's case, he might be teaching a couple different courses, and he could, you know, easily just move things from course to course and modify them really quickly. So I hope that helped. I'll stop and see if there's any other questions from other participants. Jennifer.